With Role-Playing Public Radio, where this is RPPR episode 102, Rules Fetish. And with me, not as always, is Mr. Caleb Stokes, because Tom is on vacation.
He is. He's wandering America like Kane from Kung Fu. Yes. If he was bad at Kung Fu and didn't particularly care about your problems.
Well, I'm sure he cares about the problems, but he's not going to do anything silly like...
I said fight. Particularly, like he will sympathize.
Yeah, he will.
And then go on his way.
Yeah, like any sensible person would. I would do the same thing.
Sucks, bro.
Yeah, if the local gangsters were shaking down your father's auto shop for protection money, and he was going to close up, or the community center was going to close up because of that, I'd be like, well, that's terrible. Well, that's America for you. It's a great country, but there's systematic inequality. Anyway, we're getting off topic. So, in this episode, we're going to be talking about rules complexity versus their utility in games. When do rule making and simulationism go too far?
When rules become literally a fetish, and the part of the game experience stands in for the whole of the game experience. Yeah.
So this will be more of a analytical episode, but we'll still have a lot of fun with it. But first off, we have a bit of news. Big news. No Soul Left Behind Kickstarter is upcoming. We're working on the promotional angle of it right now, the video and the text and the other stuff. So.
I just recorded a video. I apologize to everyone who has to see my face.
And we'll be interspersing with some still images and whatnot. And I'll have some dramatic music that might help.
Oh,
yeah, we'll have some
fancy.
The finest royalty free music that I can get. So
only the best.
Yeah, only the
for
best.
You backers. But seriously, I worked really hard on it, and I would be totes appreciative if you would please back that book.
We'll probably have another episode up pretty soon after this one, so we can plug it.
Beg again.
Beg again. When we do Kickstarters, you get more content.
Imagine my internet cup of change jingling as hard as you can.
Yes. It's for the kids, because we're all kids at heart.
Yes.
Next up, Gencon is also approaching us. So we will be running games. We'll have the RPPR meetup on Thursday night. There are details on the RPPR message board, which I will link to.
We'll be doing a seminar for RPPR Game Designers Workshop.
Yeah.
And we'll be doing another panel discussion with Rob Boyle from Eclipse Face on economics in games. Yeah. So if you want to hear about how you can turn inflation into a plot, we'll be talking about that. So,
yeah, it is going to be totes McGoots awesome.
Yes,
and so
John Maynard Keynes' stats in D&D. He'll be giving that out
in 5th edition, of course.
Yes, definitely in 5th edition.
He has advantage.
The market demands 5th edition.
So we also there's a new episode of Unspeakable, the Unspeakable Oath podcast. Episode 11 just came out, so go take a listen. We have Ryan Macklin on as a guest, and of course Mr. Adam Skyblancy and Shay Knight, as always, and me. A little bit. And there's also some of my work in Eclipse Phase has been put in the Morph Recognition guide, which has just come out. It is 130 pages of new Morph art and all the Morph rules collected in one handy-dandy volume. So you can see what the Samson Morph, which is the one I came up with, and all the others. Yeah, but who cares about it?
And they've got added sidebar text of Fire All Agents basically Yelp reviewing actual bodies.
There's actually a good number of plot hooks in them.
Yeah, there's a great number of plot hooks. They're really good. So if you ever wanted to run used Morph salesman Eclipse Phase campaign, this is the book for you.
Or Mad Men with Morphs. Mad Morphs. Hey, talking about economic stuff. There's a campaign right there.
There we go.
You gotta advertise the new Olympian model. Make it sexy.
Discount the splicers. Yeah. They're about to turn.
So, and also, finally in other news, Raillery, we're doing a bunch of stuff on Raillery. Mostly, and by a bunch of stuff, I mean Payday 2. We're all playing
Payday.
It is really good. We're telepathic mutants fighting an elemental plane of cops.
Yes. I want it to be a role-playing server, but I'm usually alone at that.
I'll keep posting.
No one else stays in character.
I know. Well, there's cops to be shot, so if Cop Killer is role-playing I'm role player of the year. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, so missing the forest for the trees. That's kind of rules fetishization in a nutshell. This is, and so when we first talk about it, I mean the fish in a barrel example is Phoenix Command. If you're firing a shotgun at a fish in a barrel, and you can figure out what pellets hit what fish, and how much the water alters the trajectory of these pellets and lessens their impact, then that is your
7
system.
hours later, you would see if you hit that fish and if it survived.
And, yeah, I mean, we would hit the left fin. I mean, is that going to impair mobility on this fish? Is it going to, it's a very complex system. And this is, games in the 80s tended to go one or two ways. One is super, super, super rules light, which would be like Toon or the Rocky and Bullwinkle adventure game, which is a real thing, and it came with hand puppets.
Wow.
And I want to eBay that shit. Do you know
I missed out on so much.
This is early 80s. Do you know who worked on that, too, though?
No.
Warren Spector, who later came up with Deus Ex and Thief.
That's kind of crazy.
Which makes me want to get it even more. So, anyway, totally useless aside. So,
but on the other side is Phoenix Command, which is not a game so much as calculus problems. Like,
yeah, well, that's one end. But you still have this kind of thing in newer systems. A lot of people say,
yeah,
like Eclipse Phase, when people were talking about character generation.
Yeah, yeah. So Eclipse Phase, as we mentioned before on podcasts, is very front end heavy. So, for instance, without that Excel character generator, you are going to be making character or the different packages included in Transhuman before that came out. Without those two aids, you are going to literally be making your character for 4 to 5 hours.
Yeah. I've also heard one other too many skills in it, and too many overlap between skills.
Yes. So the difference between deception and impersonation, and
or just a knowledge skill
and disguise, and yes. So there's a lot of that. I still love the game totally, but yeah, it is very much in. And you can tell this by talking to Post. They wanted to do transhumanism. The game. They wanted it more than anything else, and it shows. Now, thankfully, they have a good, easy-to-run, quick-to-play game after you get that out of the way. So once you've done that front-end stuff, you can play a game really snappy and quick with really tight mechanics.
Yeah.
But then if you're sleeving mid-game, everything is going to screech to a halt as you go back to that sort of very fetishistic... What gear do you have? What gear are you? What gear are you wearing? Kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think every RPG has this to one degree or the other, and I think the thing is, there's no objective answer to a certain degree because gamers want different things out of their games.
Yeah,
and the reason I think a lot of this happens is because game designers are trying to be like Microsoft in the sense they want to be all things to all people. So, like Microsoft Office has a billion fucking features. You're only going to need, any given user is only going to need like 10% of those features, but over a broad spectrum, 100% of those users are going to use 100% of those features, and Microsoft wants to sell to all of them.
Yeah.
And so it builds up a lot of complexity. That's why you see shit like encumbrance rules.
And I understand this impulse because, speaking of Red Markets, still working on it, I mean, the first draft of Red Markets was like, boy, aren't encumbrance rules fun? And it was just nothing but how much are you carrying? How many specific bullets can this specific gun hold? And I wrote like 20,000 words of that before I realized, wow, this wouldn't be fun at all. This would be terrible to play. So I get the impulse. It makes a lot of sense. But at sometimes you have to notice it, and then there are some games that don't notice it at all and just barrel straight ahead.
Yeah.
With that, like I think what brought this up was Continuum.
Yeah.
Aaron, we were talking about Continuum in sort of awe, me, Thad, and Ross, just because it's the most enjoyable RPG book I've ever read that I will never ever play or run.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it is time travel if time travel actually existed. Like it is very complex to keep track of. and I don't even know what a game would look like. And Aaron's like obsessive with time travel.
Yeah.
Quite literally obsessive about it. He's like, no, I'll run it. I can do it. And Aaron like reads it, and he's just like, just hanging his head down. Sand loss.
I mean, I like that I have a copy of Continuum because I feel like I've given it to you.
Yeah.
I've given it to Thad. I've given it to Aaron, and it's beaten you all. And I didn't even try. Like, you guys went further than I did. I read the example, like, play description, which is like, here's an example play. And I'm like, yeah, I'm done. I'm done.
Yeah, I don't feel totally stupid either. Like, but it's just, yeah, you have to keep track of, like, the second by seconds of your travel and, like, paradoxes.
And every event.
Oh, it's just nightmarish to think about running it. And that's the thing, like, the setting material in Continuum was very interesting. It's a thoroughly interesting and unique concept.
Yeah.
But all of that stuff is secondary to this is how time travel works. And, like, you literally can't get to the game over this wall of rules that's like, this is how time travel works. So there's, like, it's like a big plexiglass wall where, like, there's a game I want to try to play and tell a story in on the other side of this big wall, but you're not going to get past the obsessive time travel. Like, oh, wait, you didn't take into account that the Earth is moving through this universe at this amount of speed in orbit around the sun?
It does that?
No, yeah, it's time travel. It's like, well, time travel, if you're really trying to find a unique space, the Earth is hurtling through the universe at this speed. So you're literally, like... having to keep track of all this stuff so you don't pop into, like, a vacuum of space. And it's just... And I love that it takes that much into account, but it does nothing to streamline that information. You have to keep, like, a ledger, quite literally, for every single character.
Yeah.
And I don't know how the GM's going to keep track of that. No. And it is quite literally a rules
To be honest, I think it might be able to run that, but you couldn't do it in a normal tabletop setting. I think the only way I could see it practically working out is if you had a very obsessive, very detailed-oriented GM who ran it as a play-by-post game over the internet, where they're asynchronous.
Maybe. Yeah.
Because then you, like, the player posts this, the GM takes notes. And then, like, this happens.
And every other player can take time to figure out the paradoxes and what the hell is happening.
How much frag you got now?
Yeah.
We're on the third post. You're dead.
And it attempts to walk you through it. Like, when you're first... I think when you're first made a time travel, you can only move an hour or so back and forth in time and stuff like that. But it's still just... Oh, it's just so crazy. Like... But it's got good fiction and stuff like that. So, yeah, that's what we're talking about. Games that have... some sort of obsessive need to simulate something that in turn sabotages the rest of the game or is just not as good as the rest of the game because it's just obsessively trying to simulate something which can't be simulated. Like Ken and Robin talked about this and they had a big argument over simulation versus modeling. And I was really intrigued by what Ken Haidt said, and he's like, well, no one ends a relationship and says, well, thank you for that. That was a lovely love simulation. Like, even when you simulate something, you know it's not real. That's, like, we're not talking about the Matrix here. Nobody's going to get into an RPG and be, like, confusing it for reality.
Yeah.
You're always modeling things to some degree. And when people just can't see that you're never going to get there, so you might as well stop at a certain point where it stops being fun, I think problems occur in game design.
It does. And the thing is, why is this fun? I mean, recently there's on the Delta Green email list, there's this huge discussion about the alpha playtest and blah, blah, blah. And that led to someone bitching about the fact that it still uses hit points for the character. Because and Dennis Detwiller was like, one of our design goals was be compatible with Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
That means hit points. You can design your own realistic injury table or system. It won't be Delta Green, go for it. And for me, it's the thing when in Call of Cthulhu, hit points have never been a problem. Characters have never been able to survive that much. Like, you a few gunshots and you're dead. It's if you can't dodge out of the way. It's also what utility does that have in the game? How is that going to be fun? How does that improve the quality of the game? I mean, when you have a shitty rule, I mean that actively makes the game less fun. The obviously easy again fish in a barrel is the Palladium system. They have like terrible skills that don't explain how you can use them. You can't make attribute checks. You can't there's so many things that are like, holy shit, once you try a system that has these kind of common quality of life things.
Yeah.
Then you go back to playing and you're like, holy shit, I can't do this, I can't do this.
Yeah.
When I'm running a game, I can't play in it. It's just like, it's terrible. And so there's that. But then with simulation rules, like, how does this make the game better? And, every game has these kind of things. Like, I think one of the things actually in Call of Cthulhu is, to a certain degree, I think the burst fire weapons for automatic weapons. Because it makes automatic weapons ridiculously powerful and dangerous.
Which they are.
But
but you also have to roll 70 dice for a single attack. And it gets very laborious.
Yeah. And
very quickly.
And it does, and so I dislike that. Also, characters. I mean, I guess this is more lack of rules, but the characters are cut out cardboard figures that have no connection to the outside world outside of their credit rating. There's no mechanics.
Every game has its focus, and Call of Cthulhu does have wound rules. There's the sanity rules. There's extensive D10 random insanity tables and things like that. Your wounds in Call of Cthulhu are your specific mental malady.
Yeah,
they go in there, and then you die, but that's a relief. And and so Call of Cthulhu has its own focus, and it is trying to be more simulationist on, at least for its genre, to simulate what happens in Lovecraft fiction. But at the same time, I'm not saying that games shouldn't have focus. Is that sometimes that focus overwhelms the premise of an RPG at times. So we were talking about games that. Rules in a wide variety of games that tend to go on this. Mm-hmm. For me, it's all vehicle damage or vehicle collision rules. Because if vehicles collide, for me, I care about one of three outcomes. We're fine, we're injured, we're dead. I need the rules to simulate exactly that much and no more. Because, yes, vehicle collisions are insanely deadly. Yes, car crashes are awful. Why do I want to play a game just about car crashes? I don't. And then the situations...
Auto duel.
Auto duel. That's the focus of the game. But, in other games, why do I need that much information if I just need to discover one of these three things? Because if I'm crashing in a game, it is a genre crash. Car crashes are a trope and a plot tool in genre fiction. And they need to do that job and no more. Yeah. But then... any number of games from Shadowrun to anything else have these GURPS.
Yeah, well, GURPS
have these extensive mass speed hit area calculations that are just entirely close, and they slow down a car chase, a literal honest to god car chase. The thing you include in movies because you have to keep people from going to sleep. A exciting moment have suddenly got down by you doing physics at the table. And I just never understand that. You had your own...
grenade scatter dice.
Yeah.
Because this is so common. I mean, I see it in, D&D and just... especially games in the 80s. But, even now, D&D... for a 3rd ed had it. I think they did take it out of 4th ed. But probably... I'm sure Pathfinder has it. But, it's... you throw a grenade and it bounces, or the artillery, and is that dramatic? Do you really need to go into that level of detail for fucking figuring out exactly where the grenade goes on the grid table? Or whatever?
Again, it's what the player wants to know at that moment. Did I hit them with grenade shrapnel, or did I not hit them with grenade shrapnel? That's a skill check. That's one skill check.
Yeah,
you don't need to do each individual bounce down a set of steps or something like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, in going back to the vehicle collision rule, you have the 3 possible results. And it's the amount of effort you need to figure out which of those 3 results. I mean, if in most RPGs, a vehicle collision is basically going to be fatal. I mean, they're usually at the high end of damage. You know, it's 90 d6 or whatever, And so you just roll. Why do you need to figure out that it's 90 versus 86 d6? I mean, a lot of these rules. Again, I think this is getting back to the Microsoft thing. Is the game developers want to cover every possibility of things that can happen, and they want to approach it with the same kind of depth, and then they don't give real good. The rules themselves, though, aren't very modular, and so people who don't want to give a shit, like you, about like, I really want to figure out exactly how many D6s worth of damage I want to do for that. But there are gamers who want to do that.
Yeah, and it's not bad. Like, when I was writing the devotees, like, there's definitely a different perspective between Jack and I. And it worked out, and I think it made it a better scenario. But there are things that I did in the playtest and in writing that I just kind of hand-waved. Like, Jack wanted to know exactly the distance between each individual space in the habitat and the amount of travel time on average it would take to get there from the exterior of the habitat versus the interior of the habitat. And when I ran the playtest of the devotees, you arrived when it was narratively convenient to have you arrive and something was happening there. And I'm just like, I am completely content to say, like, well, the characters show up when it's interesting for them to show up, because this is all make-believe. But other people don't want to do that. And it's not a bad scenario. It's not a bad choice. It's just a different aesthetic choice. What we're talking about here is that not cases like the devotees or anything in Eclipse Phase, but when that just goes to a crazy bananas extreme that doesn't make your game more fun. Yeah. Or makes it unplayable in certain cases. So.
Yeah, I mean, and as a counterexample, I actually did calculate for the Duality campaign, which we will be posting in the near future. There was a time where I did calculate how long it would take the players to get from point A to point B, and that was like for character from point A to point B, which was like measured in weeks, because it was like from something in the main belt from like Oberon, or not Oberon, but like the Titanian Commonwealth or something like that. But I did not do that during the game. And I did that for the rules for that were kind of covered in Eclipse Phase. Yeah. And I think the thing is, in the Eclipse Phase travel times, that's, as a thought exercise, it's really important for the GM to know, because especially
for farcasting and
actually on a conceptual level, to understand how the society works, because the Rimward part of the Eclipse Phase universe, or the setting, is culturally presented very differently than the inner system. And part of the reason is the sheer amount of distance between each of these polities, between the Jovians and Titan, and between, the Anarchists and, all the way at the ass end of the solar system versus the main belt and that kind of thing. And because there's no FTL drive outside of Pandora Gates, and, Pandora Gates are hand waving. So, because a lot of times when you look at, like, a GM picks up this Eclipse Phase book and starts reading through them, he's like, okay, well, they'll go here in the next session, they'll go here, they'll go here, they'll go here. And then you read the book, it doesn't jump out at you. Yeah, that takes 6 months unless you're farcasting. Yeah. And then, so it's hard. So for you, you can't get back up. And so it means a lot in terms of a GM, sort of like, no, they're really fucking far apart. Everything's really distant out here. There's a lot of fucking space just in the solar system. It's not something you think about, because especially for sci-fi fans, everyone's used to the Star Wars, Star Trek. You're there when you need to be, and so you don't. It's part of the setting is that everything is so. So that's kind of an edge case. That's kind of like, but
and sometimes it's good to get out of your sort of aesthetic. So like, even though we have those rules in the devotees now, like, I would still hand wave when characters get there when I run it. Yeah. But another thing that happened when we were writing is that I designed Awe in No Evil and in the campaign to be scary from a philosophical perspective, like the loss of self and all that kind of stuff. And that's great, but Jack was just like, yeah, but how does it work? Yeah. To the point where I literally read nothing but cognitive science journals and texts for like a month to make like a prototype of Awe for the campaign, because they're very hard sci-fi. But at the same time, I think it's far stronger. Yeah. And it's less lazy on my part, and it's a far scarier threat now as a result of me having done that. So, I think it's good to get out your aesthetic at time, but there are times when, and I think it's more noticeable when it goes bad than anything else. Yeah. When the simulationist goal will just really jump in the way of having fun at the table. Yeah.
It does happen. I mean, the thing is, whenever you have to stop to look up a rule in the game, when you get to one of these weird edge cases, like somebody hits them with a car instead of just shoots them. You know how guns work in the game. You know how that procedure works. But when you hit them with a car, you're like, oh shit, I need to blah blah blah, make a drive check. Oh, how much damage is inflicted on the car when you hit the zombie with it? Shit like that, and it just kills the game. And I think the thing is with these simulationist rules, they can be like, for the devotees, I think the travel time. The reason why you didn't worry about it is because it was a one-shot. We just appeared. The stage was set near Legba, and we just appeared near that. But if no,
it's not travel times to get to Legba. It's travel times within Legba. Like if I want to get to the cafeteria, to the Soul Market or something.
Yeah.
How long is it going to take me to move through the hallways?
Yeah.
And that's for some people, but and we did that, and I mean, if you want that, that's in the game now.
Yeah.
But it's just in my design aesthetic, I was just like, okay, you get there when it's fun.
Again, I think, even with that, I could see a kind of a useful idea because, again, it's a zero gravity station.
Yeah.
It's microgravity environment, sorry.
And it could very well,
people think that you can run that
if you've got less trust for your GM.
Yeah.
And you're more afraid of a killer GM, and the station's going to explode in T-minus whatever.
Yeah.
You totally need those rules.
Yeah.
You totally need those rules. But and what I'm saying is, they're not bad rules, but it's just an example of where you can have a lot of leeway within the simulation versus modeling aesthetic argument and be fine and just have, a different way you run games and a different GM. But there are instances where it goes too far, way too far. I mean, to use I'm not going to call it the perennial whipping boy of RPGs because it would probably enjoy being a whipping boy, but to use the worst possible example of something, Fatal, in addition to being just morally repugnant and inexcusable, is quite literally a fetish game. It doesn't care about modeling anything else in the game nearly so much as it cares about modeling sick, disgusting sexual violence, and and it makes a game that is unplayable, a game that is in fact only worthwhile in that it is there to beat up as no one feels bad making fun of Fatal, as we've said before,
right,
but it is quite literally a fetishized game.
Right.
It doesn't care if your sword works or if you have any fun at table or if you calculate, because I've seen people who've tried to play it on play-by-post with stuff, and it's just agony. It's just agony to do anything in the game because it's so broken because it wants to do this one creepy thing endlessly well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is, Fatal is an easy target, but it deserves it. It deserves every bit of this combination. And having looked at the rules a little, I remember looking at these playbook, and they have the character sheets posted, and they have things like attributes for spatial recognition and just every kind of 3 types of dexterity, hand-eye coordination, and just multiple layers and layers of redundant stats. So you would it would have the anal circumference, but it also have your blood type and every other, dozens and dozens of stats. Characters had primary stats, they had secondary stats. It was very. And the thing is, from that play-by-post game, it was on something awful forums. And
which is hilarious to read.
Yeah, because it was played for laughs because these were basically making fun of it while they were playing it.
Yeah,
because one character made
they were hate playing RPG.
They were playing an RPG,
which is a different episode entirely.
Yeah, we will have to do that with Rocky and Bullwinkle. Angry hand puppets.
I want to play that.
So I actually read I was reading the War Inspector Wikipedia or some article about him. He's talking about how the fuck are we going to make this game? They're drinking at a bar, and then it's somebody said hand puppets. That's how we'll do it. And that's
after the 5th shot, it sounded like a good idea.
Apparently, I just in that golden era of the early '80s when RPGs weren't what they are today. They hadn't been labeled, they hadn't been stigmatized like they are yet. Right at the beginning, and so it's a mainstream product. We'll have it for kids. Party Bullwinkle. Talking about
the '80s stuff. Yeah. Auto duel, not just the fetishization of auto duel rules, but the fact that they included auto duel in that one scenario.
Zombie Town USA.
Yeah, Zombie Town USA, which had nothing to do with Mad Max Road Racing. That is fetishization.
No, if you read it, they set it in the auto duel universe as well. Like in normal America, it's just a B movie with that's not really even about zombies. But in auto duel universe, it's just like some asshole doing unethical cloning experiments.
And yet they are totally incompatible thematically as narratives. And that's the thing. Like, that is fetishization in the psychologically diagnosable sense. You take this fetish and you expand it in your mind to encompass everything to the point where you can't. So, like, for somebody to get their RPG rocks off, they have an auto duel fetish. You got to have warring cars in there, and they included it in there.
Well, that was the marketing thing. That was.
I guess, but that's when it gets unhealthy. Like that's when the
kids are all into the auto duel.
Yeah, that's when like Phoenix Command gets unhealthy. Like that's when it gets to be like you need to go see and talk to somebody when you're so into your firearm rules that you forget like everything else involved in war. Like it's literally war. Like
that's the thing. Well, to be fair, role playing games do derive from war games, and in those early days, and even by the mid '80s, a lot of people just saw them as a way to do war games, just with one character instead of controlling a unit or an army. And so Phoenix Command was pretty much like, let's do Vietnam. Only we're doing platoon.
But even war games with like miniatures and stuff.
Yeah.
Don't get into the level of Phoenix Command.
They do.
Yes, or they do. And then that's still a mistake. Like, because Campaign in North Africa is what I assume you're talking about. Like, that's individual
There's a lot of them that are very similar to that.
Individual strands of pasta going to your troops.
Well, no, it's just the water consumption rate was higher because they boiled it for spaghetti.
Okay, yeah, that's great. But no general in existence on the planet has ever planned that far down. That's just not how bureaucracies work. Like, it's flat out not how bureaucracies work. You give a broad order. Yeah. People further down worry more about those details. People further down worry more. That's why sergeants run the armies and not everything. Like, it's just flat out not how any human organization functions. Like, nobody, like, no CEO of some company is individually tracking the paper clips his office workers are using. And yet, there are games in which the equivalent structure is maintained. Like, can you imagine how bad that would be if your boss came by and like counted your pencils?
I'm sure we're gonna get some comments to that
and
effect.
Stuff like and so that's what I'm saying. Like, it's a fetish. It leaves reality behind sometimes, and the idea of what a game should be, because it gets fixated on this single thing it wants to do.
I mean, and yeah, they're during gameplay, I would certainly agree with you, because again, it kills the momentum.
Yeah,
and that there's nothing less fun than everyone looking up their rule book and figuring out what the fuck, how is this event going to take place. But I think there are edge cases. There are some cases where these kind of rules are useful for the GM to prep. And I think like a lot of these wandering encounter tables, a lot of like these travel time tables are conceptually useful to figure out, like, for the GM to imagine in his mind's eye what going from this place to this place entails. How are they going to encounter things? What kind of condition are the characters going to be in when they get there? They're are they going to be healthy or exhausted or whatever? And like, again, I actually would not only use the Eclipse Phase stuff. I looked up NASA planetary simulation to figure out what's the difference from this celestial object to this celestial object, and figured out the travel time. Oh, it'll take 6 weeks for them to do that. Well, that's useful for the scenario, but those kind of rules are useful. But the thing is, for a lot of these games, it's hard for the game developer to figure out what's going to be useful for that purpose versus, what's going to wind up killing the table because we're figuring out where the grenade bounced to or whatever. So, it's kind of a conundrum. Like, how do you solve that? How do you resolve that?
I don't know. And as I said before, like, I don't think simulation. I'm not saying everything needs to be fate accelerated in Cthulhu Dark. Like. I'm not saying that at all. I think there is a serious bonus to it in many cases, and adds verisimilitude to the fiction of the piece. It can do all those kind of things. My thesis in this is that when you see a game that goes so extreme to the one side of the spectrum, like Phoenix Command or Continuum or something like that, I think it reveals something interesting about the RPG as an art form in general. Like, because as the extreme case, I think it reveals something about the numerous things that are in the sane side of the spectrum. Yeah. Just like certain forms of insanity reveal interesting truths about the functioning human mind. Like, so I should say I'm not against all simulation, but yeah, I think playtesting is really important on that kind of stuff. To make sure that you're going at speed at the table. And I think maintaining speed of play at a game is very important. People use the word flow, which I hate, but I think that...
More or less than paradigm.
Infinitely more than paradigm. Where is the flow at? Like, if you say my story doesn't flow, what page do I turn to?
Yeah.
It's a useless term. But they talk about table flow and things like that. But the speed of play, like... the speed at which you're moving through the narrative, especially at points where you need to move quickly for suspense and things like that.
Yeah.
I think that's key to making sure your game isn't bogging down in these certain scenarios. Like, and that's what I've learned trying to get red markets to work with things like that. And I'm leaving out it's an economic horror game, but I'm leaving out huge swaths of economics that are going to bore people to death, like irrational behavior models, which would be secondary models on top of supply-demand models. You know, like, the equations could go... It could be the Phoenix Command, and you could just be working for the Federal Reserve or the NASDAQ or something, and then there are zombies, like, sometimes. But that would not be fun, like...
I mean, as a computer game, I would buy that. That would be like video game dev plus zombies, real zombies. That would be. I mean, I don't know. Kickstarter.
You're gonna stop hunting zombies and just start trading on inflation on bounty.
Oh yeah, Jesus! I mean, like, that sounds awesome.
Manipulating currency exchange. Yeah.
But why don't instead of beating up on Phoenix Command and Fatal, why don't we talk about games that are like currently popular? Like and I mean, we've already mentioned Eclipse Phase and its flaws. Call of Cthulhu is a little. We've talk about what like GURPS. Well, I mean, what systems are more familiar to you? Like,
well, I think GURPS does a good job because it's so modular. Like, GURPS will let you be as simulationist as you want to be,
right?
Upward into a level of total insanity,
right?
Where you're just tacking on more and more rule systems. But it will also let you move faster.
Well, I think the problem is with GURPS is. The reason, because it's meant to be all thanks to all people, is that they have so many things on there that if you want to run a GURPS-like game, it's hard to figure out what to cut away. And as players, it's figure out what to spend on. Like, Tom started up a GURPS game. He ran one session of we did character creation. And for me, like, Tom's obviously not going to run a super, super simulationist game where we're tracking fatigue points and shit like that.
Yeah.
But... when I'm looking at the character sheet, I was just like, what the fuck? How do I make my 100-point character be kind of useful and blah, blah, blah? And I picked like 30 skills because they all sounded kind of useful for my character concept. Like, I'll take Smuggler, I'll take Merchant, I'll take Stealth, I'll take Fast Draw, Ammo, Fast Draw, Pistol, you know.
Yeah.
And so I wound up with this shitload of skills. And I don't know if I'm missing out, like, you know, I know, for example, people in my game, Base Raiders, they don't know, like, I actually wrote a character creation survival guide on the website saying, like, here's what you need to avoid going crazy, getting killed, or, like, having your reputation ruined. And that's, you know, to protect health, composure, and reputation damage. And I don't know if everyone picks up on that, but, like, there's that kind of thing where people make characters that are kind of really crappy because they don't understand the system because there's too much complexity there. And so I think GURPS is kind of problematic because of that. Because even if you're doing rules light, the character sheet's the same either way. And, like, the basic book doesn't say, like, here's the basic stuff, here's the advanced stuff. They just list them in all skills in alphabetical order, and then it's just kind of like, holy shit.
Well, I think Strange Fate and Base Raiders in particular is a pretty good example. Because, like, it is based on Fate.
Yeah.
Which could not be more popular at this point, and that's it. But Fate, like, as it's written, Fate Core or Fate Accelerated, is somewhat allergic to this issue, like, or immune, if you want to put it. Like, it is completely on the other side of the spectrum as avoiding that. But as you were talking about in Unspeakable lately, that does make it problematic for horror in that, like, the sense of deprivation and exhaustion and things, and that lack of control necessary in order to feel fear is somewhat hard to even generate in the Fate system. But Base Raiders is more complex, but I don't think it approaches the level of fetishization because you have pre-made skills. You don't have to go through all the trappings for every single thing. But with all those skills and with the power tiers, it makes the game more tactically interesting. Like, if I'm facing someone what's the highest tier? Ascendant or something?
Godlike.
Godlike. If I'm facing someone godlike or ascendant or a higher tier than me, I need to strategize more than if I'm just, laser blasting a random security guard. And I think that is interesting, and it adds it adds verisimilitude and conflict to the narrative, which is great. And so that is a more simulationist of like how superpowers might actually work in a real world with endless variables than maybe Fate is. But I think that adds to the game and make it's a specific game as opposed to a different game. And so that's good. That's just a matter of what you want your game to be. But then there are levels where it's just, you are either have no rules and you're just, make believe, or you have just completely lost your mind on a specific set of rules. So
that's good. So I go.
I think D&D is interesting because it's endlessly struggling with this issue. Like,
it is. It goes back and forth.
Yeah, it's endlessly wrestling with how deep it wants individual parts of the rules.
I think 3rd and 4th edition were about as complex as each other, but in different ways.
Yeah.
The 3rd ed, it was kind of... 3rd and Pathfinder both have the thing is if you're a spellcaster, it's a much more complex game than if you're non-spellcaster. But if you're a more complex character, you're more powerful. Like, just flat out. Spellcasters are better than fighters.
Yeah.
D&D Next is 4th solved that by making all characters equally complex, which people didn't like, or some people didn't like. I ran 50 sessions of it, so clearly I hate the system now.
Well, it's like equally complex from a meta perspective because like in terms of like simulation, what we're talking about, like I cannot tell you what it looks like. Those 90% of those feats in there. I don't know.
Powers.
Like, your phase shift example from Dark Sun. I'm like, but what does that do? It does numbers. And I'm like, but what does it look like? I can move from this square to this square and do numbers. Like, that's not very verisimilitude. It's not really. It's the rule for the rule's sake.
Yeah.
I think Iron Heroes is more simulationist in that regard, in that you are a muscle wizard. But I know what your muscle wizardly specifically looks like every single time. I know what that move looks like. I can see it in my head. It uses imagery to convey the move. And there are rules to support that, which is great. But and
again with Pathfinder, you have the thing where everyone is getting to be more and more complex as they get up in levels, and I think a lot of the complexity, again, is in, like, Pathfinder's probably better about it. When 3rd Ed was really bad about, like, here's a monster. He has 20 spell-like abilities, and we're not going to explain how he uses those. He's just going to he can do this, this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And 4th Ed was much better in that respect in terms of, like, here's what a monster will actually do in a fight, And I think Pathfinder's learned from that, too, in their more recent things, to a certain degree. But next... tries to solve the problem by removing the complexity. Everyone's about this. It's going much more back like the 2nd edition, very much simplify.
And I mean, even when this is an extreme, it's good to note the difference between like how quickly it wants to model it versus how accurately it wants to model it, because it tells you where your game designer's priorities are. Like, I find social combat very interesting in games, and that's why I'm trying to model it and stuff like that, because actual real world rhetoric is infinitely complex, and it's got, but if you are on opposed sides of an argument and you are trying to convince a third party, it is as tactical as any fight you're going to see. But like, you'll find games that will have 50 different kinds of stab you could use and then charisma for anything else, which is why in those games I play a liar, because lies are infinitely more powerful than any weapon I could possibly have. But it's why, like in red markets, I want you to have like your your entire cadre of different social skills needs to be used for different mechanical benefits to get a job.
Yeah.
And so you are literally engaging in a social combat where you make tactical decisions on what to do next. But at the same time, you're also having a role-playing challenge to do it. Because that's where my priority's at in that game. So, like, when you look at, like, things that are just hand-waved, like, oh, bone solvent, no, definitely, you can come inside, versus things that are, like, rigidly modeled, it's going to tell you what this game wants you to do at the table.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I like that. And I was just thinking about another thing about D&D is that, in particular, they kind of fetishize magic items. And in a very, very commoditized very way.
Yeah.
Especially in 3rd and 4th edition, where there's literally, like, especially by 4th edition, you literally, like, you get X amount of gold per level. You use those to buy items at the magic item shop. And, like, they said, oh, no, you don't have to do like that. You could do this instead. But everybody wound up doing the default thing because it's just easier that way. And
oh, yeah. If we were talking about, like, commodity in RPGs and the subtext, the pro-capitalism subtext of almost every RPG, like, that's a different episode. But, yeah it is very fetishistic, like, ooh, I want that. Oh, I want that sword in the window.
And the shopping stuff.
Yeah, and the shopping.
Which is, I think, one of the big sub-hobbies within RPGs is just shopping for imaginary elves in your elf games. So. But,
like, I've recognized that, and that is, like, really interesting to me from an English nerdy critical theory reader perspective. And that's why for Red Markets, I'm reading nothing but Marxist literature for quotes for the book, because it is going to be like all of the bad parts of capitalism. Need to throw some Thorsten Veblen in there, too. Yes, I am going to buy that gear that makes this game easier, but I am going to be reminded that it's driving me insane because my kid's not eating, you know, like, or vice versa. Like, I'm going to feed little Timmy morality pet and go out into the wasteland armed with a pointy stick. Like, so yeah, you know, that's a different episode in itself. But yes, that sort of capitalist, unexamined, like, consumerist idea does find its way into a lot of RPG item rules.
And not even in a physical, like, item, like in literal shopping, but I think, like, in some games like Exalted, are you familiar with that?
I am not.
Okay. You've heard of it at all, or not?
Is that a superhero game?
It's kind of. It's a White Wolf game. It's their anime game, basically. It's a fantasy universe. It uses the same kind of D10 dice pool system that the World of Darkness uses, which I know you love so much. But characters have powers, and they get more and more anime-ish as the characters level up in powers. Like, they're... I'm not very familiar with the setting. I have the main core, one edition, an old copy, the first or second edition of it. But literally at the same point, they could, like... I dodge the universe, you know. I dodge the concept of being attacked, you know. Like, it gets a very abstract, godlike level of power as the characters... become more and more powerful. So you're throwing mountains at them, and then you parry the sun, you know, or whatever. And and there's social combats where you're like, I am the moon. Oh, you're clearly the moon. So, you know, and that sort of thing. So, but that's another kind of shopping fetish, because, like, it's a pretty large game line, and there's a lot of books that, like, here's player book X, and it's not items, but here's your cool new powers. You could be a secret member of this secret society with access to these special, you know, ninja techniques or whatever. And, you know, or you could be a werewolf, or you could be a vampire werewolf, or you could be a vampire werewolf who's part guy. Yeah, mummy, yeah. And on and on and on and on. And I think that's another kind of fetishization of rules, player facing, though. Yeah. Not DM facing, or GM facing.
But I mean, since you got me all riled up about this. Another thing to look at with this kind of stuff that I find really interesting is the extent to which you are your stuff in an RPG. Yeah. So, like, in Eclipse Phase...
Or your powers.
In Eclipse Phase, you literally are your stuff. Like, your body is a thing you own.
Commodity,
that is a commodity. And the extent to, like, you are your stuff and things like that. But the extent to which it's unexamined in games, I just find endlessly interesting. Like... games in which, like, your stats derived from your stuff are so supremely important and dominate so much of your character sheet, and in which your life of the person using that, like, is unexamined, or vice versa, in games in which you are just like Fate,
Fate is the exact
in which
opposite.
you are powered solely by force of personality, and are in many ways just immaterial. Like
a gun is literally a cosmetic accessory.
Yeah, you're incorporeal. You fight with your spirit rather than anything else. And I find that interesting. Which is why in Red Mark, I try and make one negate the other. Like, yes, you are your stuff, and your life is terrible, or vice versa, and you have nothing. Like, so yeah. I mean, I didn't even really think about that until you brought it up, and you were bringing up the commodity factor of D&D and things like that. So I think one thing to take from this rules fetish argument and looking at these extreme examples is that it's an interesting way to have a discussion about game design and like where your priorities lie in game design or in playing games. Because, it's always good to look at the negative space, the extremes, to see where, the sort of assumptions are laid bare in the insanity.
That's a really good way of putting it. And
same way I like to watch The Room. Like,
Tommy Wiseau's got a new thing coming out.
To appreciate it. Really?
Yeah, there's a sitcom apparently. That
I have a friend and his wife has not seen The Room, so we need to do.
Holy shit!
We need to do a room viewing.
Oh yeah, no, bring all the booze, and the footballs and the.
But I learned more about film from watching The Room.
Yeah.
Than a million. Good
Greg Sestero has a book out now about his experience.
Oh yeah.
I need to read that. Yeah. So there. The negative space idea is a really good way of thinking about it. Like, what is your game not doing, or what is your game not about, or like, what are the unexamined assumptions of the game? Yeah. In other words, and so in practical terms, though, like if you're not a game designer, if you're not trying to do something, if you're just running a game or playing a game, what does all of this rules fetishization mean? One, just think about how when you're actually running a game, when does the game screech to a halt? What is the thing that fucks it up? Is it the vehicle collision, or is it doing something unusual? Is it is it at the end when people are doing character level up or whatever? I mean,
are deciding games you want to run for your group, or games you want to play with your group? Like, look at those points where the speed of play drags, or you find yourself not having fun and you can't find anything to GM doing wrong doing that. And like, once you examine what those parts are and what they have in common, and is it because they are trying to simulate something in the genre fiction or in life to the point that you find it absurd or not getting to the point, and then you're quickly developing your own aesthetic for what RPGs you like. Thinking about this is a good way to decide, like, if not what to buy, once you've read it, what you want to go into or what the priorities are or things like that.
I mean, for me, like, other things, if it's not necessarily a rule issue, if it's not something, like, the common thing is people stopping to look up the rule books, figure out what the fuck this new spell is, this new player's ability does, or vehicle collision, or grenade scatter die, or whatever it is. Is it a type of scenario? And if so, if you're, like, trying to run a mystery in Pathfinder, and the group is just staring off into space, playing on their phones because nobody's got a fucking clue about what's going on in this fantasy world. Maybe try it in a different system. Try and incorporate house rules. Try and say, I'm just going to give you the clues. You guys, figure it out. Make it a gumshoe type thing.
Pathfinder is not a game trying to simulate procedural investigation.
I know they have those kind of scenarios.
Yeah, they do, but it's a game that is not designed mechanically to do.
So house rules.
Yeah. It's not Trail of Cthulhu. Like, Trail of Cthulhu wants you to investigate and come up with ways to investigate and spend points to investigate, and Pathfinder wants you to find out where you need to go to kill the monster. Like, and that's fine, but you need to decide what your group is into and stuff.
So if you've been listening to this episode, and if you have some ideas on like where your group fucks up, or in terms of slows down, screeches it off, what's your rules fetish? So leave a comment or post on our Facebook group or our message board, and we'll try and answer them. Probably maybe have some feedback for next episode, something like that. So so next up, because Tom's not here, there's no letter from him.
He's off, sympathizing briefly with people's problems before moving on.
I know it's not even really dirty works, and no one has to do it, but It's his vacation, so he's going to do that. So, but next up we have shout-outs, and then that was some good music that I haven't chosen yet. So I'm sure it'll be great. Pod-safe music. I literally go to...
Sounded royalty-free.
No, pod-safe music is different than royalty-free.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's music that is specifically cleared to be allowed to be used for podcasts.
Oh, no, I didn't hear that in the subtleties. I'm not a trained musician.
No, clearly, or a producer. So shout-outs we got some. I'll just go ahead and jump in. First off, a nice anthology of horror and fantasy stories called Sword Mythos by Innsmouth Free Press, I believe. It is... I got a review copy a couple months ago, and I read it. Then we did episode 100, so no shout-outs, and then episode 101, which was the... Better Angels, no
Postmortem.
Yeah, postmortem. So I haven't had time to review until now. And it's a great anthology, and it covers a lot. It's not just generic Conan. I mean, it's like sword and sorcery type style fiction, but adding Cthulhu mythos elements. Or so Robert E. Howard meets Lovecraft, but they do not do the kind of D&D-ish Hyperborea kind of Conan type settings. They choose like different areas, and each author chose different areas of history and time. And so you have like Africa, you have the Aztecs, you have ancient China, you have one set in the biblical, like the tribes of Israel fighting each other.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That doesn't need any help from the mythos to be terrifying.
Well, no, it's worse with the mythos. It's pretty terrifying. And then also Carcosa. There's one set in Carcosa.
Yeah, that's the one you didn't like, right?
No, I
care for that one?
I like that one. And then they have ones like Age of Pirates, Golden Age of Pirates. And what I love is so many of the stories. Some of them are genuinely freaky. Some of them I kind of like, eh. There are a couple of stories, but a lot of them, about half of them, I think, are written as though they're like the 18th chapter of an ongoing serial, and you're just like, yeah, you know this guy, this pirate guy, Captain Barbados or whatever, and he's just going on his quest to do, and oh no, he fights mythos things, and so they just throw you in the deep, and it's just a great read. And some of the stories, like the biblical one, the one set in ancient China, which I think is the last story of the book, are particularly stand out in my head. And I can't think of particular names right now because I'm lazy. I didn't look it up. But Sword and Mythos. It's a fun read. Certainly a good read if you want to read good mythos stories that are not set in stereotypical settings. This is a good read.
Yeah.
So. Some are horror, some are definitely much more fantasy action versus horror, and some are much more horrific. So there's widely varying in tone. So that's, if you don't like that, keep that in mind. But if you like, anyways.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
My book review, I recently finally got around to reading Delta Green's Tales of Failed Anatomy by Detweiler. And I'd read many of the stories before because I'm sort of obsessively follow his blog, and he'd released some of them for free previously before they got collected. But it's interesting, like, because I think Tynes in his introduction of the book hits it on the head, is that Dennis Detweiler is better at writing fiction than he has any right to be. Like, for an RPG tie-in fiction about, FBI agents fighting fishmen, it is sort of absurdly literary at points and really well constructed. And I mean, if it falls into any genre tropes, it's that Delta Green becomes its own genre. Like, you can bet the agent is encountering some horrible thing and about to either go insane or kill themselves so they go less insane or be killed, and it's going to happen. But other than that, like, they're arranged chronologically and they're extremely well written and with good imagery and unique ideas. But yeah, it is much like Ty says in his introduction, is that, like, there's no reason that you need a Murakami influence for your RPG tie-in horror fiction, and yet with Detweiler you will find it.
So there's a Japanese guy drinking whiskey and listening to jazz?
Yes, yeah, pretty much.
Okay. I'm in, so if it's not a loath trap, that's just a bonus. So did beautiful women hit on him without him really doing anything? I'm sorry. Am I typecasting?
Maybe a
little bit. Next up, I'd like to bring up a game Caleb brought to our group, Mice and Mystics.
Yeah.
From Plaid Hat Games, I believe.
Yes, Plaid Hat Games.
And it's kind of a cooperative board game in the vein of Hero Quest and games of that nature, or Dungeon of the Descent, although there's no GM adversarial thing. But it's basically we're fantasy dudes turned into mice. We got to go save the king, and yeah.
But we're mice. But we're mice. It's difficult.
Yeah. So we fight things like cockroaches and rats and spiders.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The games are divided into chapters, so you have scenarios. You only use certain map tiles for scenarios, and map tiles are interesting because you're mice, because you can flip them. So not only can you move from one tile to the next, you can go climb up into the kitchen or climb down into the pipes and things like that. There's encounters for every map tile. There's specific victory scenarios. You have a variable level of place, and you can string them all into a campaign. So, like, the campaign rules, there are certain cards and certain characters that don't unlock until you've done specific things.
Yeah.
What I find most interesting about it is that there's side quests that will achieve later things in later scenarios. Like, so, for example, we played the first scenario. You guys tackled the side quest.
Yeah.
And you got an ally that will appear later.
Nice.
In a scenario.
We'll have to figure that out.
Yeah, so I find that really interesting, and it is sort of complex. I'm still learning to run it, but it's not like Arkham Horror complex. Like,
Arkham Horror. I think the base game we've added.
I'd still say it's a little less complex.
Oh no, it's definitely is. But it's the Arkham Horror that we play. We've had like 4 expansions to it, and we're just running with all of them. So like,
yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. But I my friend plays Arkham Horror as well, and he's just got base system, and it's still far less complex and easier to pick up.
It is, but I think we've kind of doubled the complexity in terms of the amount of expansions. So that's good. It's
like $50 on Amazon. But it'll be like 70.
It's got great production values.
It'll be like 7 or 80
die
something.
cut counters, 3D miniatures.
Yeah, really good miniatures. With the exception of Tilda, who is a little overboard.
Because the art in her thing doesn't like makes her.
Yeah, this is a bit of So there's a cleric mouse character who's basically the healer of the party and bashes things with a mace.
Yeah,
full blown cleric, bog standard RPG stuff. And she looks fine in the art for her, but in the miniature, this mouse is just stacked, just like beyond all reason, just like double D's.
She's got back problems.
Yeah, it's a little obscene, like And it'd be one thing if they drew the character that way, then I'd be. But the character does not look like that in the artwork for the game. It's just the miniature. It's just. But damn, it's out there, and it's odd. So
all right.
I was not the first one to bring this up. We played this game with a professor friend of mine, and his wife was just like, "What the hell is up with that mouse?"
Miniature design's got a miniature sculptor's got to sculpt. Yeah,
I guess.
So they wanted,
but it's a good game.
Yeah,
despite busty mice.
Or if you're that kind of gamer, because of busty mice. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I don't know. This is the episode about fetishes. So.
Yeah.
All right. So my next one is actually also has animal people in it, although not quite as titillating. It is a video game I picked up on the Steam Summer Sale called The Year Walk. It is originally an iOS puzzle game, but they ported it to PC, and it was a pretty good port. I beat it last night. It's a pretty short playthrough, depending on how good you are in puzzles and how quick you are to use their hint guide system. Very quick. I'm very impatient. I'm a horrible person. But it's based on a obscure bit of Scandinavian folklore, where it's once a year or during certain times of the year, during certain holidays like Christmas, you could perform a ritual to basically see a year into the future. And there's kind of a vision quest, dream walk kind of thing. So what you do is you spend the entire day by yourself, away from all people. You don't eat, you don't drink, you don't light a fire. And this is like in Norway or Sweden or someplace, so you're fucking cold, especially if it's winter. And then at midnight, you go out. And there's all kinds of creatures that are lurking in the forests at night. And so you have to deal with these creatures. It's very, very challenging. So you have to go to this church. You have to do it and then go to the cemetery and perform a certain kind of dance or walk around it in a certain pattern. And if you do that, and then you'll see visions of the year to come. Who will die? Who will fall in love? Will you be wealthy? And that kind of thing. And so the game is you going on a year walk. It's night, it's the forest, and there's all these creatures from Scandinavian folklore, like the Angel Maker, who is this creepy motherfucker, as you can imagine, and the Church Grim, and the Brood Horse, or something like that. It's just, it's very got great music, very kind of mellow, or it's kind of it alternates between being kind of like
yeah, what was that webcomic we read a while ago? The Shamanistic Noir.
Oh, yeah, that was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah.
But it reminds me a little bit of that from the way you describe it.
Yeah, no, it's a neat little game, and it actually apparently you beat it once, then you can play through it again and get a different kind of unlocking it different. I don't know. I'm going to try it again because it only takes like an hour or two to play through, depending on how quick you are. A couple hours at most, even if you're really slow solving puzzles, because you can kind of brute force some of them because it's one of those point and click kind of adventure games. So that's really cool. Anyways, a really neat game, and so you check that out, iOS or PC, maybe even Macs. I don't know. So you watched a documentary?
Yeah, it's on Netflix streaming. Yeah. So I bring it up. So I've been reading a lot of Zizek or Zizek. Yeah, I have trouble saying his name.
Everyone does.
Shows me how intellectual I am. But anyway, very prominent cultural theorist, maybe the most famous living critical theorist nowadays because he's very public.
Yeah.
Talked at Occupy
and so on.
Yeah, writes lots of books, things of that nature. But he's got this documentary on Netflix now called "Pervert's Guide to Ideology," and it's basically Marxist ideology and critiques of capitalism and things like that. And it gets very serious. At points he talks about the Holocaust and things about and anti-Semitism and things like that. But he is like doing full-blown cultural criticism. So literally the first thing he examines in the documentary is They Live. And it's specifically the 20-minute fight scene between Rowdy Piper and Keith David.
Yeah.
So he's kind of hip to what the kids are into. So for a Marxist, even
Marxists can recognize a beautifully choreographed fight, one of for the ages. Anyway,
no, but he actually incorporates and justifies what he calls ridiculous length of the fight into his sort of ideological critique. And then he goes after the sound of music and brings up some things that I'd never considered before about that, which are kind of interesting. And then he talks about some I think Ukrainian filmmakers and stuff I never heard of before. But it's very interesting. It's a very interesting critique, and it's very watchable for being what it is. And then you can read the McSweeney's piece about him introducing you to the gym and laugh harder. But yeah, it's very interesting and accessible as opposed to reading 140 pages of talking about the cultural other.
Or which 5 pages of Adorno, and I'm like, I'm done, I'm out.
Which if you're into, which I am, is great because I'm reading through his stuff now. But it's a good movie to watch too.
All right. Yeah, no. Now you've sold me just with the opening.
He literally just opens They Live.
Yeah. So. All right. No, I'd watch that any day of the week. And speaking of fine and cheerful and uplifting works of art from Europe, a movie we all you and I and Aaron watched recently. I got on Blu-ray. Very, very cheerful movie. Very, very. I would say almost propagandistic in how patriotic it was. No, I'm sorry. It's many wars ago. It's a movie about Italy's experience in World War I. It was the darkest. It is
This is a Glancy recommendation.
Yes. Thank you, Adam's Guy Glancy.
And when Glancy recommends a war movie, you go find that war movie.
It is about as nihilistic as a war film as I can imagine.
Yeah.
Outside of all the characters just killing themselves in the opening scene, I can't see how more nihilistic it could be. And
basically
anti-authoritarian, like.
Pardon me. Basically, an Italian officer systematically kills.
Not just an officer, the general.
Yeah, the general systematically kills his own men.
Yeah,
and you follow the men as he is.
Yeah, follows
murdering them with terrible, stupid World War I battle tactics.
It's interesting. Like, it starts with one lieutenant, of course. Eventually, spoiler alert, he dies halfway through the movie. But as he's dying, he's like, "No, let's go and kill the general."
Yeah,
and you're like, "Please kill the general." Like, no, of course not. It's not that kind of movie. But interestingly enough, I mentioned this to Glancy, and he said, "Oh yeah, the general that they based that guy on, he was relieved of command after like he got like even the Italians apparently the Italian high command had like limits on how many soldiers you could get butchered." But the entire movie is just the insanity of institutional ideology and like just allergy to logic in the outside world and just consequence of action.
Yeah, but, I mean, it's very interesting because you root for the Germans more than you do
they're the good,
Italian officers.
Yeah.
Like, they are literally way worse than the enemy. Like,
I think the best, I mean, and you could do an entire movie just in one scene, which you pointed out, which was the medical tribunal, which where this panel of officers were examining wounded soldiers and inevitably judging them all to be like, oh, self-inflicted wound, you're going back to the front. Or we're going to put you in jail, or we're going to shoot you, or whatever else. And
you blew your own leg off. Like,
literally that level of like, oh, there's no powder burn on his wound, which means normally that means that wasn't
it means he put a pillow in front of his pistol before he shot him.
Or a piece of bread or whatever. And so it's just holy shit. And the Blu-ray version of it is very well, they cleaned it up quite.
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing restoration.
Yeah, it looks really good. So you can see like these poor guys that put on body armor, World War I era vintage body armor. They look like budget Daleks or Cybermen.
Budget Daleks?
Yeah.
Man, that's bad.
You saw them.
I know, but Daleks are pretty low budget as is.
Would you call them
it's I see what you're saying.
Yeah. All right. And forced to mention, and so it's a great war movie. In that you want to kill every officer in every army who's ever ordered men to their death. So there's that.
It's all the absurdity of Catch-22 with none of the redeeming humor.
Yeah. So you want to be cheered up.
Yeah.
So finally, there's another movie that you watched.
Sarah and I went to the Moxie and we saw The Rover, which is a new film by the guy who did Animal Kingdom, which is this, I really want to see it, but it's this Australian organized crime movie. Mm-hmm. But The Rover has got Guy Pearce.
Yeah.
And what I was terrified of, Robert Pattinson. Yeah. But he actually, does a really good job. He acts quite well, playing this sort of maybe mentally handicapped, but, very slow criminal. And then Guy Pearce plays this just unrepentant, irredeemable psychopath. And the basic premise of the film is that it's set in Australia after an economic apocalypse, not in a collapse, but a full-blown economic destruction. So people have been poured to death, quite literally, and the world building of this, desert,
they just starve
abandoned town, of people selling everything and things like that is pretty good. But the basic premise is that Guy Pearce gets his car stolen by these thieves who wreck after escaping a crime. And then he steals their truck to chase after them and get his car back because he wants his car back. So he has a vehicle, and this vehicle, though it was wrecked a little bit, is ostensibly better than his car. And he does not care. He wants his car back. And then he finds Robert Pattinson, who was injured and they left behind to die, the thieves. And so basically he takes Robert Pattinson hostage and goes on this bloody swath of retribution to go get his car.
Jesus.
Like, and that's it. Like, for the entire movie, you would just have to guess until the very end his motivations of just being so desperately after this single fucking car. And that's the thing. Like, he's a monster and clearly the bad guy, but I heard Bob Mondello say on his review, and he kind of nailed it on NPR, was that the purity of his motivations make you root for him in spite of the fact that he's just
that charismatic,
just a total anti-hero because he just wants his car back. Like, and so it's very unique world building, and then Guy Pearce just kills it, and it's cool visually, and it is definitely worth a watch. But it is brutal, like a brutal film. So
yeah, we're just giving all kinds of cheerful stuff.
Yeah, definitely lighthearted.
The mythos. I like how we started with the mythos and then got darker after that. So, in terms of shout outs. So finally, though, we do have an anecdote or two. First off, I would like to mention I'm running a second group. Bill, Melissa, Sean, Nan. From Hex Hollow game, if you guys remember that in the actual play. I ran a game in Trail of Cthulhu, Shanghai Bullets from Stunning Eldritch Tales, and so I said, I want to run Mass and Nyarlathotep. It's a big big campaign. Would you rather run it for me to run it in Call of Cthulhu or Trail? And they all said basically Trail. One of them
very different from our group.
Yeah, very different. They liked the strategic resources, like. What Sean was basically saying, I felt like in Call, I just keep trying actions until I got something. I just keep gambling with the dice, but I keep trying riskier and riskier action until I got some kind of information. But in this, I know I got the information, so I'm not going to, just keep getting more and more desperate until I get a clue.
Maybe I can run an NBA campaign with them one day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, someday, Caleb. Someday.
I'm so excited about it.
So you got to play in one. Jeez.
I did get to play in one. It was nice.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I know. You. But anyway, so that's coming up, and they had a blast with Shanghai Bullets, causing all kind of mischief in 1920 Shanghai. The scenario itself was written in 1930 Shanghai, and I said, I'm just running without modifying it too much in the 1920s. And one of the guys, Sean, actually knew all about this. He's like, yeah, that's pretty much the same. So, so hopefully the historians out there won't chastise me too much for getting something wrong.
He's going to bust through the wall like the Kool-Aid man.
I wouldn't even be mad. I would be impressed. But we have to talk about your Trail of Cthulhu adventures that you recently concluded, the Final Revelations game.
Okay, so I bought the Final Revelation at last Gen Con, and I finally got around to reading it, and they're purist adventures, so they're meant to emulate Lovecraftian sort of nihilistic hopelessness, and as much as possible. There's very little kill it with dynamite, stuff like that.
The most cheerful adventure, the most I think the least dark scenario out of all of them involves a color out of the space. So it starts there and gets worse.
Yeah.
So if you know what, anyway.
It's very interesting build. It's built as a frame scenario, so you play two characters in every session. You play the character studying the character that you're going to play.
Right.
And then, flashback, and then you go to the scenario that you are actually playing. So it's very cleverly written. Everything takes place in England in the 1930s in the Lake District. But it is, just reading it is worth it, because it is, at many times, the most F-you scenario writing to the players I have ever read. And it's so matter-of-fact and unapologetic about it. It's just like, no, everyone's going to go insane and die.
Yeah.
They had no choice from the beginning. Encourage players to do this, but then just tell them it was pointless. This scenario is not complete. There is no mystery to solve. There is no way they could achieve knowledge of this. And at times, Ross, as we played this, was like, well, that's kind of bullshit. Why can't we do? Well, I got all of this. I spent all the points, and then I had him read it, and he was like, well, Ross, you could tell me your reaction. You were just like,
oh yeah, no, you're pretty much fucked.
Yeah, I ran it as it was run.
Yeah, no, you did.
So I said it was an experiment when we read it, but after reading it,
no, I enjoyed playing
I'd never read a book quite like it as a campaign, and I was really excited to run it.
But the one anecdote I think is from one of the scenarios. I won't say what order. Well, it's called the Rending Box. Yeah. And so at one point we encounter this NPC who's just totes crazy.
Yes.
And he's just screaming at this point. We get the couple things out of him, and he's just like, ah! We're just like, let's knock that. We have headaches. We don't want to deal with that.
In the book, it literally says he answers 2 questions, then just breaks and starts making a high-pitched whine.
Yeah. And earlier in that scenario, David had spent like 8 points of preparedness to have a bottle of chloroform.
Because it is the go-to tactic for the
It's
entire
our go-to clutch
RPPR
move, yeah.
crew.
But
what I did is I made him spin medicine or roll first aid.
No, none of us had medicine.
Nobody had medicine. Yeah.
And I was like, all right, I'll make a first aid check. I had no first aid points left.
And you rolled a 1.
1.
So we killed our first guy with chloroform.
Yeah.
But they were so bad at it, I made him just think, no, he's sleeping soundly.
Yeah.
And
Kept us a little saner for another 10 minutes before we encountered the rest of the scenario.
Yeah. So there were many comments on the forums, especially after Spare the Spoil.
Yeah.
And the Unseen Chupacabra's penchant for chloroform about how horribly deadly it is as a substance.
Yeah.
So we finally appeased that as the players just straight up murdered an NPC to calm him down.
But it didn't matter.
Yeah, and no, nothing does in the final revelation. Yeah.
So that's our anecdote. And this has been RPPR episode 102, Rules Fetish. This is Ross Baden.
I'm Caleb.
And